Good evening, and welcome to the second in a series of 5 honest conversations about race and how we can all move forward together. I'm Jeannie Johnson. I'm the founder of Ridgewood Walks and Ridgewood Talks. Ridgewood Walks provides free guided themed walking tours of Ridgewood, and the podcast Ridgewood Talks is where we interview the leaders and legends of our village and where we dig into the town's hot topics. We also provide community forums to discuss current events that affect the health and well-being of our community. And the purpose of these initiatives is to create a more vibrant and connected community. So here we are tonight. We're going to continue the discussion about where we are in this moment in history and what we can do to open our eyes, our hearts, and our minds to see race more clearly. I read a lot this week, and one of the pieces hit me right between the eyes. It was in the Washington Post. A guy named Trey Johnson penned the article, and it's titled, "When Black People Are in Pain, White People Join Book Clubs." He said a lot of other hard truths in that piece too, and it hurt a lot, but it woke me up a little more too. I've been protesting and holding candles at vigils and calling out indiscretions all my life, and it's not even close to being enough. I mean, I've barely even rolled up my sleeves, if the truth is told. There was an accompanying blog that went along with that too by Jenna Schwartz. And she helped me realize what really needs to happen if we genuinely want lasting and meaningful change in our society. She says we must reflect, dismantle, and invest. And these may be the foundations for true repair. So friends, we've got a lot of work to do, but first we must listen, learn, and maybe most importantly, unlearn. So without further ado, let me introduce our first guest. He's a guy I met a few years ago in a small group at Westside Presbyterian Church. He's the lead pastor there and truly one of the kindest people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. Marc Oehler is his name, and he and Mac are going to take us down a deeply enlightening path tonight. So get your notebooks out, get some pens out, and be ready to write down their words of wisdom. I also want to give a huge shout out to Pastor Sarah Lindsay from the Unitarian Society here in Ridgewood. Sarah has been a dream. She is once again our tech expert for the night. She and I are going to be watching the chat room, so please feel free to post your questions and your comments there. You can find the chat room right there on the bottom of your screen in the green box. You're all going to be muted until we you if there's some reason to. And I also want to mention that a few people are interested in moving forward with discussing the book White Fragility. It's currently out of print, so please, if you want to join the group, send an email to ridgewoodtalks@gmail.com and we'll get you on that list. So that's it for now, and I'm going to throw it over to Mac, and he is the real leader of this discussion. So Mac, you're on.
Hey, everyone, how are you doing? My name is Reverend Mac Brandon. I'm the pastor of Metropolitan AME Zion Church in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where I have been a part of that community since 1984. I was also, and this is following up on what Jeannie, who is wonderful, by the way, Jeannie Johnson, I just appreciate you for having the vision and bringing the idea of this talk to the table. In my other life, I played music, and in 1992, I got a call from the Kennedys requesting that I fly down to Palm Beach and play for Teddy Kennedy's 60th birthday party in his house in the Kennedy compound in Palm Beach. And I would be the lead entertainer. So I flew down there, and of course, you know, I like everyone else, you know, the Kennedy lore was ever present. And I got there early in the morning. Now, I wasn't supposed to perform until late at night. I got there early in the morning, and it was only the Kennedy housekeeper, the housekeeper who had been the housekeeper for John and all of the clan. And so she was just the most wonderful person. And she was hospitable, and she said, listen, you know, the run of the house is yours. For some reason, security, everyone was gone. It was just us. I mean, Patrick came through, but it was just her and I. And I was sitting in the living room. And of course, this is 1992, so we didn't have smartphones. And, you know, and I'm leafing through John and Jackie's wedding album, you know, and I'm saying, I wish someone could see this stuff. And of course, that party was later on that evening, and it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. It was an intimate affair. It was just his family and very close friends. And I came back, and those memories stayed with me. One of the things that was interesting was that every time I heard biographers or heard commentators talk about the Kennedys or the Kennedy compound, I had a particular perspective, because you see, the housekeeper spent a lot of time talking to me because she had nothing to do. Everybody was gone but me, and I was just walking around the compound. I went down to the beach and then come back, and we just talked, and we talked about all of the clan, the kids, the family, as they were growing up. And every time they spoke, I said, they never got her perspective, which would be a golden perspective. It confirmed to me that many times when there is any issue that we see, any commentary that we see, that it's important to hear all of the voices. We are, as a country, looking at an embedded issue. And many times we have a perspective, but what is so important is for us to allow ourselves to be uncomfortable enough to say, well, could my perspective be stretched? Is there another perspective? Is there a housekeeper's perspective, as it were? And so it's in that league of idea. It's in that wonderment with how different people feel, how people are looking at this issue, that we are doing this today, and that I present Reverend Marc Oehler. We're just going to let him talk to paraphrase the 1980s phrase. We're going to let Oehler be Oehler, and see what his perspective is. Finally, before I turn it over, I've had so many people who've written me emails and what have you, and our hope is not to answer every question. As another friend said, you can all go on NPR and you can all get white fragility and all get the new Jim Crow and all get these, and this is what you should do. You should be compelled to learn. But what we want to do is make you think. And so you'll find your way if we can make you think and ask questions. So it's in that spirit that we now turn it over to a wonderful man, as Jeannie Johnson did say. He's a wonderful man. I've watched him from afar, and I saw that he was a man not only of the cerebral but of the heart, and that is what we need in times like this. So, without any further ado, hey, Marc.
Hey, Mac. Thank you so much. I feel completely inadequate and completely passionate about this opportunity. I am trusting your discernment, Mac and Jeannie, and I appreciate who both of you are and the forums that you are creating together. I am grateful that, Mac, you didn't put me in the 10 p.m. spot, because I don't know how you do the 10 p.m. Facebook Live thing. I prefer the 5 a.m. calls. But anyway, it's so good to be with you. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've struggled with what I feel called to say tonight, in part because I think people like me need to do more listening than speaking, and more learning than teaching. I think, but my prayer is that whatever I offer can help us all with living with these questions that are uncomfortable but are important. And I think my understanding is God's putting them right in front of us all to journey with. So I want to speak particularly to my white brothers and sisters, particularly around some of what I think has been the failure of the church and our culture, which has been largely shaped by people like myself, white Western European males. And I think this is a large reason why systemic racism has not been addressed in the way that it has needed to. So my goal tonight is to kind of give you a window into how I am thinking about and responding to this challenge that we face, this opportunity. I'll do a little bit of sharing around my background, but I want to look at it through the context of race. I'm going to share what I'm learning, unlearning, and integrating on a deeper level, because I do think all three of those are important. And I'll share a little bit about how I and we at Westside in particular are trying to respond to this moment. You had asked me, Mac, how George Floyd hit me. And it really hit me hard, as it hit so many of us, to be saddened at the way that we treat the other. And it was just right there in front of me to see, and to take a child of God, a person created in the image of God, and drive a knee into him as he's pleading for his life, pleading for his mother. It slayed me. And it made me angry. I was angry as I looked into the face of Derek Chauvin, and I saw this callous, cold, calculating soul there was vacancy there in that look. And to do all of that in the broad daylight with somebody videotaping, I think for maybe the most powerful time in my life, I saw that what was happening there goes back generations, generation upon generation of hate and prejudice. And so in many ways, this was, I think, a transformational moment for so many of us, because like Rosa Parks or the Little Rock Nine or Matthew Shepard or that girl running down the dirt road after napalms come down on her village, and we see that terror in her face. There's something about images and stories that break through in ways that words can never. I think images are transformational on a deep level. It accesses something in us, and it accesses something in us collectively that the greatest, teaching or preaching I don't think has that same power. In many ways, I've been thinking a lot about where we are as a culture, and this phrase has been helpful for me. We're experiencing what I call a negative experience of contrast. And we are seeing right in front of our eyes the very people that we don't want to be, the very society we don't want to be. And I think sometimes we need that. We need to see sin. We need to see evil in order for the good that is dormant in so many of us to come forth and to find action and practice. So that negative experience of contrast. The other image that hits me with what happened on that video is that this, in some ways, the family secret's out, and more of us are seeing it. And anybody who understands family systems, it has to happen if things are going to change. It's necessary for transformation, but it's really painful. It's painful to see it. And there's that impulse in all of us. We want to go back to the way it was, but you can't. Once the secret's out, you can't. And so I see this as a rich opportunity. And we have to stand against the forces that want to find that false equilibrium. And we've got to find a way to move forward in a way that honors what we've seen. So let me share with you a little bit of the homework that I'm feeling called to do. And Soren Kierkegaard says, life is understood looking back and it's lived looking forward. So I want to look back a little bit, give you a sense of kind of where I've come from, and some of the handicaps, the limitations of my upbringing and my education. There's so much that I didn't learn. I was reading somewhere, that education is realizing or coming to know what you didn't even know you didn't even know. And there's so much I didn't even know that I didn't even know. I grew up in Essex County in West Caldwell, a predominantly white community, son of Swiss immigrants, child raised in a pretty traditional patriarchal family, raised in a Christian home, but in many ways, consciously, unconsciously taught to be suspicious of Black people. In high school, I had one Black teacher. I had two Black peers. And in a class of 200 kids, I went to schools that were predominantly white, was drawn to study and work in areas intended to address the social challenges of our time, which was the irony is that, yes, I went to these white schools, but I was drawn to social work and ministry. And so I studied psychology, went to seminary, got a degree in social work, worked in North Philly for 2 years as the only one of 3 white people on staff with a community that was entirely Black, African American. Worked in Elizabeth for 2 years in the port, where I was really the only white person there. And so in many ways, I should have been doing better. I should have known better. I had experiences to step out of the bubble that I had been raised in and studied in. So even though, I was a psychotherapist, a pastor, I was learning about family systems and structures and systemic problems like racism and sexism. I was, taught not to just look at the individual. So I had the tools, the opportunities to be able to see things and to respond more fully. Over the years, I've had some good relationships with Black friends, but as I look back, it's typically for a season, and it hasn't been that friendship, across different transitions in my life, and I know that I'm the reason for that I haven't been as intentional with those friendships, and so I'm working on that. I'm reconnecting with people who've always meant a lot to me, and taking that extra step that is important. I have served, and I should also say my call story, which I won't get into, and some of the people in my congregation have heard it, involved a face-to-face experience with an African-American woman who opened my heart and soul to God in a way that almost no one had at that point. And I look back with just deep gratitude for that moment. And yet, so often I haven't done the work that I've needed to do. I've gone into parish ministry kicking and screaming. God has a way of kind of bringing me back again and again. I've tried to step away a couple times. I've served 2 predominantly white congregations, 11 years in Chatham Township, the last 10 here in Ridgewood at Westside. I've had, encouraged both congregations to do mission work, but, I think part of it is, and we've had relationships in Newark and Morristown and Atlantic City, Houston, New Orleans, Haiti, Patterson, but the relationship has been more one way than I think it needs to be. And part of what we're trying to do is to try to look at mission as a partnership. We are the mission field. I am the mission field. There is so much that I need to learn. 2 educational experiences that shaped me over the last 20 years since the ministry began. The first was as part of a spiritual development center where I was trained to be a spiritual director. And that experience kind of brought some of the psychology and the ministry together. And it really was focused on trying to attend more fully to the movement of the Spirit as I understand it, and to help other people pay attention to that movement of the Spirit, and then to respond more wholeheartedly. And that has been a blessing in my ministry. And in many ways, I think has helped me realize what it is I believe pastors ought to have been doing all along. I mean, is there anything more important for us to be doing as pastors than to help people pay attention to the reality of their experience and listen for that stirring of that calling? So that was one formative experience. The second was studying with Father Franciscan Richard Rohr through the Living School for the Center of Action and Contemplation. And that was a deep dive into the Christian mystical tradition, and explored that relationship between contemplation and action. And one of the things that he would often point out to us as students, and he called the Living School an underground seminary, because he saw the seminary as failing in a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about tonight, which is getting into the heart of social justice. And so he created an underground scenario. And he said the most important word in the name, the Center for Action and Contemplation, is the word "and." To hold both of those in creative tension. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But that experience in the Living School helped me kind of articulate some things, some of which I'll share tonight, that has helped me understand how it is we've failed really as an institution in our theology and our practice in many ways, and how we can be better at discerning and responding to the will of God, and be more constructive with this incredible treasure that we have of the gospel message. So one of my mantras is, that we're called to not criticize the bad, but practice the better. And so I've been working, since I went to the ministry kicking and screaming. I said, you know what, God, if you want me to be a pastor, I'm going to try to create a church I would want to go to. And that's been what I've been focusing on over the last 5 years as the pastor of Westside, is trying to build a community that I wish I had experienced when I was being raised. One that is trying to do some good work. And so over the last 5 years, when I've embraced this call to be the lead pastor at Westside, I've been moving out of my comfort zone, and there's something about moving out of my comfort zone that has a way of kind of building on itself. You take one step or two steps, the third and fourth and fifth get easier. So the first step was to say yes to that call. The second step is, in our tradition, we have 3 ways of understanding what a pastor does. He's a priest in that he's a symbol. He points to the divine in everything he does, in the sacraments in particular. So there's the priest role. Then there's the king role, which is kind of, we don't use that language, but it's like the mayor of the town. You're just kind of checking in with people. You're trying to see, what's the lay of the land and staying connected. And the third role is prophet. And that's that calling to speak the truth with love, to say those things that are hard to say but important to say. And so I've been leaning particularly over the last 5 years, into that prophetic piece, which I think creates a more whole pastor. And then the final thing I've really been working on is leaning into, I'm a contemplative by nature, but contemplatives can kind of sit back and wait and can get passive too. And so the sense of being drawn out into action, to get on the streets, to be part of conversations like this, is part of that leaning into this, getting out there, being more visible. And so those are some of my growing edges. Prior to this experience of George Floyd, and kind of in the spirit of building a church that I longed for as a human being, we went through the first couple of years here. We went through a long discernment process, which led us to a vision statement. And there are 2 words in that statement that when we, the first one, when we came upon it and really adopted it as our vision, it hit us really clearly. This is a lifetime of work. And that word is all. We welcome all, and we invite all on the journey with us. And so, that was the kind of opening. We've got to figure out a way to be more hospitable and welcoming to all people. The second value that we lifted up at that point was growth. That if we're people of faith, we must be constantly growing. You never arrive. You're always on the journey. So shortly after that, one of my frustrations with the church is the hymnody and the lectionary, which are the scriptures that are chosen. It's amazing how much they avoid justice, and it's driven me nuts. And so for a year, we took Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking, and he basically did the lectionary for the year and picks those passages that too often we've avoided. So we spent a year doing that. Amazingly, Westside did not drive me out of town during that year, because these were some tough texts. We've been trying to be more multiracial and cultural in our hires, and 3 of the last 4 hires have demonstrated that and been leaning in that direction. But we don't yet have the diversity at the upper level of our staff that I think we need. We've spent a lot of time with our vision statement. We've been creating space to have hard conversations around the refugee crisis, around LGBTQ community, and so we've been calling forth some groups to help us on that. We spent time this last Advent on the Belhar Confession, which is the latest confession. If you haven't looked at it, it's a powerful statement that emerged out of apartheid in South Africa and a lot of the good work that was done around justice and reconciliation. So we spent Advent really spending time with that. In January, we had a summit, talk about timing, where we talked about began the conversation, how can we become a more multiracial, multicultural community? I talked about the end of the white Western male dominated church, and it's obviously dying. and around the world, Christianity is thriving. But in Europe and America, we see evidence, particularly in communities that are homogenous. There is just a precipitous decline, and so we were looking at that issue as well. We looked at our membership. At this point, we're 8% non-white. That's not good enough. And so we've been making some strides, and God has been showing up with an increasingly diverse group of people, but we have to continue to take steps to integrate our community, and I'll say more about that. But with the last class, we were at 25% non-white, and our next group of kind of prospects and guests are even more diverse. So God is showing up in people that are not like me, and that's a good thing. And so we're trying to get ready and do what we can to respond with faithfulness to that. I know that I have to change. We have to change. Jesus talks about you can't put new wine into old wineskins. So we're trying to prepare for the new wine. And so since George Floyd, we've been doing some in my Tuesday group that I have. We've been doing some anti-racist readings. We're recruiting and forming a racial justice task force. One of our pastors, Liz Juneau, is being trained to help lead us through a 5-step process as a community of faith as we become a multiracial congregation. I've been trying to preach to this moment, from this moment, around systemic racism and the George Floyd incident, trying to step into uncomfortable places like tonight, but there's so much more that I need to do, that we need to do, and I hope whatever community you're a part of, that you can draw some parallels, and hopefully some of these things will spark some things in your own thinking. So let me share a visual with which has helped me kind of locate myself and where I am. And so I want to thank Sarah. She's our tech guru, and Jeannie told me that she's going to put this on the Ridgewood Talks page. But if you see here, there's the fear zone, denial, avoiding hard questions, striving to be comfortable, surrounding ourselves with people who are like me. And too much of my life, I've lived there. I think I'm in the learning zone right now. I recognize a problem in a way that I hadn't. I'm seeking out questions that make me uncomfortable. I'm understanding my white privilege much more than I did 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago. Education, and I think the step, that I believe the Spirit is calling me to, but I'm by no means there, is sitting with this discomfort, speaking out when I see racism, not letting mistakes and my own fear of failure getting in the way from me getting into the fray, into the mess. So I found this to be a helpful image to kind of locate ourselves, and again, get back to that growth piece. We're all called, in our own way, to grow as human beings, to grow in our capacity to love with wisdom and grace. So thank you, Sarah. And we'll put that up. So what I can offer is what I'm learning as a human being and as a spiritual leader. And I'm going to let you overhear some of the things I've been preaching about to our congregation. And again, every time I preach to them, I'm preaching to myself. And so these are 10 things that I want to look at very briefly, and say a little bit about each one of them. And I'll share them all at once, and then we'll touch upon them. How am I doing on time, Mac?
Good. I'm going to have some questions for you soon. Go ahead.
All right. You want to interrupt me when you need to, okay? You want to ask them now, or?
No, because I think you're rolling, so continue.
All right. Okay. All right. So the 10 things. Unlearning, don't talk about religion or politics, number 1. Number 2, unlearning, don't be political. Learning how to transcend either or thinking. Number 4, learning how to transcend the limitations of the rational mind. Number 5, unlearning the primacy of the individual self. Number 6, integrating orthodoxy with orthopraxy. And I'll say more about that. Number 7, unlearning white Christian supremacy. Number 8, integrating individual and corporate sin. Number 9, integrating action and contemplation. And number 10, relearning the authority of experience. So let me take those one at a time until our host interrupts me.
I'm going to interrupt you right now. One of them was really insightful to me. You see, when I look at stuff that's going on, and I see contention. And I see contention, white and black. And when I think of contention, I don't think of marches. I just think of everyday life. When I think of divisiveness, I see black folks, but I see white males. I see white males more than anything else. When I look at the marches, I see mostly white females if they're white. When I see those carrying guns, as one might expect in Michigan, or when I see those who are extremists, I see white males. And what is perplexing for me is going from the civil rights movement to now, I see white males who also profess Christianity.
Yeah.
Now, that is the part that is interesting to me. And so you have just laid out very wonderfully your credential as a good guy and a good leader. How do you, as a well-intentioned man of faith, whether you're a man of the cloth or whatever, you're a man of faith, how do you square your brothers who also say that they profess faith, and yet their collective needs are on our necks?
Well, I mean, you articulated the thing that, that frustrates me the most, is that this tradition that is so beautiful, of our Christian tradition has been used to justify the knee on the neck of the very people for whom Christ would say, this is me. You're doing, and that's where my anger has been focused on in ministry. And quite honestly, that's what I struggled to even want to be associated with. That's been a lot of my inner work, because I haven't seen, and I haven't had great models of white Christianity that inspires me, because I see too much of that. And I see too much of people, I think we have to be very careful when we call upon the will of God, or we try to discern the will of God. That to me is the work of great humility and discernment, and we don't do that individually. We do that as a community. And when in the name of God we do, we commit racist acts and we participate in a system that does this, that is contrary to everything that I think Jesus lived for and died for.
Do you ever have interface with, because you laid out that there is not, though your intention is to create a society at Westside that is reflective of the real world. Your upbringing to this point has been one which you have said is largely white, right? So you would have more interface intimately with those who, for instance, when there is symbolism, which may appear to me to be hypocritical on a national level, in the name invoking, the Bible or invoking God, and yet that their heart is not righteous. Or you may have intimate interface with those who in private company may say disparaging things that I would never get to hear. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? I mean, I can't go into rooms that you can go into in terms of having the private conversation. Yeah. So how do you work with that?
Well, I think, I got to be quite honest. My biggest fear, and one of the I think my biggest fear is had been around, being more visible, with a theology that I believe is much more generous than what has posed as orthodoxy. And that, and so I think part of my hesitation of leaning in this direction was, do I really want to take on that? Because, I see what happened, you see what happens to some other, theologians who are trying to challenge, and pastors who are trying to challenge the kind of the white, supremacist kind of thing that mixed into Christianity. And there's a lot of horrible things that happen. So I think what I have been emboldened to do is, with the opportunity that I have with the people that I serve, to try to be as clear about how, the gospel message as I can be, and to turn most of that prophetic thing towards us. It's like we have homework to do, and ourselves, and whether we're subtle about it or not. I mean, that's been the fundamental failure. So now do I get raging racists who come in here and do things overtly like that? No, I don't get this in this church. It's subtle, and part of what I'm learning to do is, it's not enough, Mark, to just kind of talk about it generally. I have to learn how to, and that gets back to this, like, don't talk about religion and politics. Part of the way that's limited us, and that's a white, cultural thing. Don't talk about religion and politics, talk about everything else. Well, that's teaching us to have shallow conversations, and it's not equipping us with the tools and the lived experience of having hard, messy conversations.
Talk about partisan versus politics.
Yeah, no, but I think just to finish that point, that I'm a diplomat, right? That's more. I'm a son of Swiss immigrants. The mayor thing comes more naturally to me than the prophet. That's not enough. Diplomacy is important. But so is, learning, leaning in as I'm trying to do better and say, you know what? I see that really differently than you. And I'd be interested to hear how you came to that conclusion about so-and-so, them, or whatever. And then to say, on the other hand, you know what? I just want you to know I see it so different than that. And if you're interested in hearing how I've come to interpret the gospel, you can come to hear me preach, or we can have a conversation about that. So I think that's something that I haven't been taught very well, and I need to learn, and I think is a part of my call as a human being, but also as a pastor. The second thing is this: don't be political, which you hear. I've heard that less so recently, but I've heard that a lot. In subtle and not so subtle ways. And I've tried to. First of all, I think Jesus is so political. If you don't think Jesus going into Jerusalem on a donkey is political theater, then you're not reading, the context well enough. I think Jesus cares about the common good. I think he cares about the issues, anything that would get in the way of brotherhood, sisterhood. I think everything he says is political. He cares about how we use our privilege, our wealth, our power. So I don't think, the thing, I think we're called not to be partisan, to recognize that we can figure out ways that are conservative and progressive to get to the issues of politics, which in the end we must address as a church, as people, and as leaders. And so I'll say very clearly, I will be political, but I will strive not to be partisan. And so, I think our culture doesn't distinguish between these two things very well. We confuse partisanship with politics. So I'm trying to assume some responsibility to educate this community that there's actually a difference. And it's important to understand the difference. And it's important to not be silenced by the don't be political, because that's muting our prophetic edge. And it's basically, it's muting our prophetic edge, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and I like that. And I remember in your sermon you said that, and I thought it was intriguing. And as you're speaking, I'm wondering, putting, the rubber to the road, as we're marching and as we're striving, sometimes it can seem like it can seem like the odds are so stacked, and I think I told the story of, since 63, looking at all these demonstrations upon demonstration upon demonstration, and then something different happening 2 weeks ago, something different happening in the streets when people are saying Black Lives Matter. And of course, I have a certain sense of hope. But knowing that the bounds of what I can do are personal, but there is an opportunity to reach hearts. Now, you as a white man, how did you see that opportunity? How do you reach hearts? How do you reach across the aisle? Because the problem is police brutality, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. How do we get underneath that? And of course, my attack is, I'm going to attack it one way. As a person of color, and there's certain things I can do, but I will still be seen because of skin color. I'll still be seen in a particular way because of the history, with a sense of otherness. But we don't know. If you put a baseball cap on, Mark, you're a good old boy. Right? You put a baseball cap on and you can move around. You move around in spaces like in West Caldwell or different spaces. And when you see what's going on right now, because, what's going to happen is there's going to be a waning of emotion, of disgust, with what happened to George Floyd. Yeah. But what we don't want to wane is the undercurrent that gave fruit to that, because it will happen again. There were three Black people who were found hanging last week. Now, we don't know why, right? There was a police shooting 3 days ago, right? So this stuff is going to continue to happen, whether, and so you as a white man, I'm just wondering, what do you say? What can I do? What do you say to yourself?
Well, I think our faith has to be stronger than our current feeling. Uh-huh. There's just too much talk about feelings, like it matters that I as a white person feel something. It's really it's the decisions that we make. It's the things that we do that in the end is what our faith is about, right? Yeah. The feelings come and go, and our decisions ought not to be based on on that. Ultimately. So I think in terms of the partisan piece that you raised, too often the partisan divide has created a stalemate and nothing gets done. And that, obviously we see that on the large scale, but even within churches, like the refugee thing, when we brought that up, there was a knockdown, drag down fight for 2 meetings. Where you had people saying, why the heck are we helping them? We should be helping these other people. And so part of my job as a leader is to hold space and to say, we need to have this conversation. And I'm not going to allow strong opinions and hurt feelings to derail the important work of, we got a crisis here and we got some people who want to make a difference. So we're going to have this conversation. And so that to me is using my power and my position to influence the community that I'm called to serve and to do well by. And so, I think part of it is, not giving partisanship, acknowledging its power to destroy things and destroy good intentions and will. You have to acknowledge it, but then at the same time, you got to say, and it's not gonna happen here.
Yeah.
Because we can disagree on how to help the vulnerable and the marginalized. What we cannot disagree on, we can't disagree that Jesus calls us to do that, and the church to give witness and to give expression to that.
So you and I are both people of goodwill. And one of the things that I recognize as a man is that I have to unpack layers, and I'll call them layers of flesh, right? Because sometimes the anger is one that is a feeling. right? And I can be logical and move in decision mode and say my faith compels me, but my my flesh will, of course, that's the angst. So I have to unpack those layers. When I see subtle whistle calls, when I see stuff that is so subtle, but it is so absolutely racist in my field, in my antenna are always up and ready to hear the subtle calls, right? And I have to unpack and have had to unpack, and I think that every person who is the other, if you will, and that can take many, many expressions, by the way. I won't go further, but that I've been talking to many peoples, not just those of African descent. I have to peel away the layers of generalized anger, right? I have to consciously tell myself that I'm going to speak to a person as an individual and give them the opportunity, because what I see is generalized oppression. So that's my personal thing I have to do. I have to make sure, right? I pray up and I make sure that when I'm seeing someone each day, that I am not going to fantasize, putting their head through a window. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. Because of the stuff that's been hitting me. Okay? Yep. All right. So, maybe it's hyperbole, maybe it's not, but it's still a layer that I have to unpeel as a man. Mm-hmm. What layer do you have to unpeel as a man as you ambulate through society?
Well, I wanted to say before that, and just to qualify the feelings, I think I and many like me have to hear the anger and the sadness and to more fully understand and appreciate and honor that. So when I was talking about feelings being, like we got to get over our feelings, I'm talking about people of privilege. And so, I mean, gosh, you asked me, I wasn't expecting such a broad question. I mean, I have so many layers.
Go ahead.
What's that?
Go ahead. Have fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things I have to unlearn. I don't even know where to start. I mean, let's just take, let's take so many of the false narratives about life, winning and losing, and having, I don't want to make this about my field, but like the ways in which I've been taught so many false things about what it means to be strong, and what the ways that I was taught to be afraid of being vulnerable, and so when anger, sadness, or anything shows up for me, I actually have to spend personal time with that and get in touch with that in order for me to help people, respond more wholeheartedly to what's really going on. Because I think part of the way we've organized ourselves is we've protected ourselves from discomfort, and we've kind of bought into this illusion that if I just make my life comfortable enough, and if I have enough convenience, that I won't have to deal with that big thing, that elephant in the room, and that doesn't work. And so in my own life, I've just had to get in touch with, the ways, the ways that I've been wounded, as a man, as a son, as a partner. And that's the entry point. I mean, that gets to the whole, if I can come to get in touch with my own wound, then I'm able to stay present and hold space for you or for anybody else who brings with me. And I won't find, subtle ways of moving on to the next thing, right? I don't know if that answers your question.
That's good. That's good. And so, as you look at the race question, what do you have to peel away?
Oh, that it's. I mean, I think I've been in denial about how just at the heart of everything it is in our country, and I have to peel. I have to like grieve the fact that I was not. I did not learn how much this is holding us back and how much it has prevented me from having genuine intimacy with somebody who has a different skin color. you and I mean, I look at you, Mac, and the moment, I met you, I'm like, this guy, I mean, I feel like I have in some ways more in common with you, and I don't mean to minimize the differences but like there's no reason why I should have been more, shouldn't, I mean, I think it would be a blessing for me to know you better than I have. Right. And so there's a loss. There's so much, especially if I think about some of the work that I've had to do, and the people who've cut through it and been a gift to me. It's often the other, and it's not always, a black person. It could be a gay person. It could be somebody from, anybody who's different than the white male thing that, is oppressive to me as a white male. I've had to grieve the fact that, yes. And again, I don't want to make it because I don't want to minimize what we're here to talk about. But I think part of it is realizing that there's a poverty to the way we've organized our society that impacts all of us. And it's, it impacts, white men as well. But, in that we haven't been taught to fully love, the way that I believe we're designed to, and to see, people for the divine image that they are, and to recognize that my greatest teachers are people who just don't see life and haven't experienced life the way that I do. And that's the part that I grieve, because, it's taken me a long time to see that and to want to genuinely try, to continue to take steps in that direction, and realize that I need to be a student and sit at the feet of other people who have a whole heck of a lot to teach me about what it means to love and what it means to be an instrument of God and to be a servant of others.
And you really said some insightful and heartfelt things. So as a shepherd of a congregation, that you want to teach them to be disciples, and you want to teach them to go back to their homes where there may be at least the residue of some of this societal dysfunction. How do you tell them? I'm seeing that there's 100 people on here. Who knows how many on Facebook Live? But how do you tell them to go and do the good work? What do you tell them to do? How do you what is your counsel?
Well, around race, I think that's part of what I want us to learn how to do that. Because I mean, honestly, I had in my own personal life, at my family table, I'm not really good at it, and I got to get better. So I think part of on the race, on the issues that we're talking about tonight, I think we have to learn this together. But in terms of in terms of other areas. To me, that's the work. Worship is, as I say, is not the main event. The main event is out there in the world, and we're here to train and to practice, living in the way of Jesus, and then to bring that forth into the world. I mean, it's on our bulletin it says, when the worship has ended, the worship has ended, the service has begun, which I think is a Quaker statement. That's it. To me, that's it. I'm not interested in putting on a really big show. Right. Like, that's not what it's about.
Depart to serve. That's right. You know what? I think that questions have been coming in like pretty fast and furious. So let's give Marc a chance to field some of those.
Yes, they have been, Marc. So given where you just left off, and folks, I'm going to go out of order the way the questions were asked, but I promise we'll get to them all. But given what Marc just said, someone asked the question about what you think Jesus would do with a white supremacist.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, the only,
better you to
confront with, I think that, the image I have is he would hold his hand and say, "You are just so wrong," and so I think my understanding of Jesus is the relationship is always, he's always open to, that relationship. On the other hand, he speak the truth and confront him and say, you're wrong.
Okay. There's another question here. lost it. The question is really about sort of the relationship between church and how racists might sort of hide in their Christianity. So the way it's phrased, sorry?
So what would hide? I didn't catch that.
Sorry, how a racist, how a sort of white supremacist might hide in their Christianity or in a Christian church. So the way it's put is, our church is being used as a cover for, you know, so.
Well, I remember my mentor growing up, he went to school at Duke, and he told me while he was, I think he was at seminary at the time, there was a group of people that said, you want to come out into the woods, we're having a worship service outdoors. And it was basically, it was a KKK rally, and they were singing all the same hymns. And it was like, so I think that's where I think the theology has been so manipulated that, to me, it's really important to return to healthy theology and proclaim, unpack these texts. I am the way, the truth, and the life, which is used to like bludgeon people to death. You have to unpack this stuff. I mean, theologically. Then I think in terms of, and that's like, but again, that's more macro. Personally, I think there are opportunities that we all have where some of this slips out, and we have to address it. We have to call it out with strength. We have to be assertive. When it shows itself, or when we have evidence of it, I think then we got to address it. So I think to answer it, they can hide in Christianity because we've perverted so much of the gospel message, and we've made it into this kind of win-lose scenario, and we're the insiders. Everybody else is going, that we can address, but then on a personal level, we have opportunities as well. I don't know, does that answer?
Yeah, I actually, if it's okay, I'm going to jump into a question of my own actually right now, because I think dovetails with what you're talking about. The note that I wrote down for myself as you were talking, my question is, what is the relationship in your mind, at least, between Christianity and sort of historic white saviorism, right? I'm thinking about like even missionizing, right? Like Western European missionizing. What is the sort of the historical way that Christianity has been tied to a sense of like, we white people are going to go save everybody? And how does that play out now for you as a white male pastor of a Christian congregation? What is your relationship to this question of white saviorism, and how do you sort of understand how to step back and, all that?
Well, I mean, the history, the doctrine, the discovery, I mean, it just goes back, colonialism, it's just a horrible history. And I think, so just becoming more educated about that is important, educating the congregation about it. And I think it gets to the heart of Christology, which is we have, what I've tried to, teach here is this idea of the universal Christ, that, that Christ, as we have, as the biblical witness speaks to, is present at the beginning. He's, Alpha and the Omega, present in everything, in everyone, in all things, the great leveler. Like, we're all in this together. The divine is it within all of us. And so Jesus is just the manifestation of that. He gives us a window into the heart of who Christ is. And so by the focusing on Jesus, and Jesus being the right one, the right way, you gotta, Jesus is going to save you. You're going to go to hell unless you call upon the name of Jesus. That's ego. That's a perversion of the Jesus message. And I think we've got to get back to the Jesus who represents the Christ, who is present in all traditions, in all people. And so rather than start from an argumentative or I've got to fix you posture, which the white savior does, right? I'm going to come into town and I'm going to clean, I'm going to, right this ship or whatever. We enter into genuine dialogue with people from the posture that I see in Jesus, which is a posture of humility. he who exalts himself shall be humbled. And, so does that answer your question? So I think we have missed the mark on our Christology.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, I think we could probably have a whole hour-long conversation
long conversation about that.
And its relationship to like white supremacy. But I want to make sure we get back to the other questions. So someone asked, and this may have been more rhetorical than anything, but I want to lift it up. Someone asked in the chat, Darlene asked, why do, and I'm gonna substitute they with white men, feel that they have to put a knee on anyone's neck? And I don't expect you, Mark, to like speak for white manhood and answer that question, but I think it's an important one, this question of like, what is it that's really going on?
Yeah. One other thought on the previous question. I think hierarchy. Forgetting that if you take Jesus seriously, those at the top of the hierarchy must serve those at who are at the bottom, and so a whole different understanding of power is at play than the way that honestly churches have typically been organized, and so I think that's another key piece. And then the question around why do white people? Well, I think we project onto the other all those things that we don't want to see about ourselves. I mean, it's classics. You see it in the scapegoat stories in the Old Testament. It's easier for us to put it out there and then to destroy it out there than it is to actually come to terms with it within our own soul. So that's why we do it. And that's how we can do evil in the name of God. We actually think we're doing a service in some sick way to, but what we're really doing is we're running from our own shadow. We're running from our own work. And so anybody who does that, the only way through that, the only way to make another choice is to get in touch with whatever that is, the rage that would lead to the pain that would lead someone to do that, and that person needs, we can't do that by ourselves. We need a community to help us to be transformed through our pain, so that we can make a healthier choice. If we don't do that work, we end up just bringing hurt wherever we go. And that just obviously gets magnified when it leads to somebody doing, what Derek Chauvin did.
So Mark, there was, I'm gonna jump in with a question I saw. There's so much stuff that's good here that we could just go to town with, and perhaps we will go to town. You and I, and who knows, we may put a Facebook Live on it or something. I saw a question: is there such thing as Is there such thing as a religious left? And I thought that was an intriguing question because it has some stuff with it. What's your thought, just as a reaction to that question?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a religious right and there's a religious left, and honestly, I get frustrated with both. Personally, I get a little more frustrated with the left sometimes, but but I do absolutely, yeah. And again, I think the either-or thinking, which gets gets played out for all of us, and we get into our little echo chambers, and we think we're saved because we're in the right echo chamber. That's the part of the problem, and religion at its best has taught a way of paradox, of holding differing ideas. Jesus, fully human, fully divine. You and I at once, saint and sinner. God, a God of judgment and mercy. And so I get frustrated with, both sides of the political spectrum, because I think we get locked into our agendas, which in the end become more important than the work of restoration and reconciliation and working with people who may differ with us on certain issues, but with whom we need to make the kind of systemic change that I think we are longing for.
So in looking at the agenda of redemption and of restoration, you said, and it's true, that we understand by looking back and we live looking forward. Looking forward now, because it's one of the things that I ask myself, what's next? It's the reason we're all gathered here. It's what's next. What does tomorrow look like? And I don't mean that in a highfalutin, now it's the whooping part of our sermon part.
Yep.
I mean, in a real way, what does our next look like as a society? Because that question also speaks to what we see our society is now. So in the near term, I hate to put a time on it, but in 6 months, there's a movement going on right now. I hate to put a time, but I did. You know, who are we? What do we look like? And how do we affect that transformation to what we want to be in 6 months? Because I say we want to be because we are people who live in hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, to quote Jeannie from the beginning, we got to do more than book clubs. Although I think some of that impulse is healthy and good. I think white congregations, white people have to do some real work digging into the issues of privilege and understanding that as a you know, just as a reality. And so there's some work that we can do there. I think we have to do a better job listening to what people are saying about their experience. I mean, let's just talk about our country for right now. I mean, I think what happened with COVID-19, two things happened. I think we had a situation where more people who hadn't been as uncomfortable got uncomfortable, and they're like, holy cow, we are living close to the edge, more of us than we realize. And we've heard people, I mean, you heard people talk about this on political stump speeches, but like there was a lived experience of that. And at the same time, there was a forced Sabbath where we really did slow down and we got back to like what really matters. And so I think we have to look at privilege. We have to acknowledge that there is, we all have power. We all have, shared power on the one hand, but there are people who have more opportunity and a position or whatever. I think people like myself need to use that more assertively than we have. And I think we just have to, we really do have to cross, these, I mean, I feel like the future of the church is to have, I'll just use, because I think church a lot of ways, we have to have porous boundaries. We have to realize that there are, we have to work with organizations and people who have a similar set of values. We may disagree on a number of things, but there's so much we can agree on. So we have to create spaces where we can have conversations. And then we have to identify, I mean, I love the fact, as I was listening to your talk last week, Mac, you talked about this moment we have almost like all these cells, but they're operating with almost one mind, and it's in concert with each other, which is amazing. On the other hand, I think for there to be sustained change, there's going to need to be some leadership emerging from that. And so maybe part of our job is to identify who those leaders are, support them. I think in terms of, allocation of resources, we have to invest in organizations and initiatives that we believe are making a positive impact on the issues, of this time. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do, and the church ought to be at the table for those conversations, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that?
So let me jump in before we're out of time. What do you think about violence in the marches, and what do you think about the looters?
Oh, I was reading somewhere. Well, I was thinking of it in terms of Jesus and Malchus. The story where, Peter and Jesus. So Jesus is arrested, the consummate love, incarnated, right? The guy who's, got the best intentions at heart. He gets arrested by the soldiers, and Peter goes and he's so angry and he cuts off the servant Malchus's ear. So we could look at that in two ways. We could say, man, wasn't that horrible that Peter cut off Malchus's ear? And that was kind of sad about Jesus being, arrested. And that's kind of what, like, I see so many people in society doing. It's like we're making a big deal about the looter, where we really should make a big deal about, Jesus got arrested. Yeah, that was a shame that Peter, took out the sword and cut off Malchus's ear. And so I think any change is, and I've had this email and conversations with a number of our members, is messy. And we expect this is part of the deal. I mean, how many of us have been transformed in any significant way when there wasn't a whole lot of, of things attached, conversation, things that we said that we shouldn't have, things that we did. I mean, it's just part of it. And now we know this, on a family, personal level. As a society, of course, this is going to happen. And we ought not to give it the power that it doesn't deserve. Violence is wrong. I mean, there's nobody saying that violence isn't wrong. But what's also wrong is that when we're not served, like I'll just take a police officer, the example, that, police officers obviously have to maintain some law and order and be able to, protect and to serve, but they also have to be connected to the community. And so we can't forget that other piece. And so, again, that's part of that place in which we have an argument about looting and we miss the real conversation that needs to happen.
That's right.
We're so skilled at that.
That's good.
And we got to stop it.
That's good.
It doesn't serve anybody well. And so I think that, so much is coming to the light for so many. And I think that's one of the things. We got to do better.
Yeah.
This is a tool of those who want to maintain the status quo of keeping things just as they are. And that's not good enough. I
love it. Unless your lighting is wrong, I think you're red. That means you're worked up, and I love it. That means we've got you provoked, and hopefully we've provoked the people who are watching as well with some of the things that we said. We can't answer every question, but we can make you think. And if you think, and if there are questions which emerge from this conversation, then that's what we've done our job. And that's what we want to continue to do. Marc, you have passed with flying colors. You've done a wonderful job in elucidating some thoughts. And I was wondering about, some of the things, what you would say. And I appreciate it. I appreciate some of the theological references. I think that the Peter analogy was perfect. Some people would sabotage the conversation with talk of looters or the violence, which is a absolute, genuine, and reasonable conversation. But the eyes of the prize should stay on the angst which has fueled it, and I just appreciate you. And so at some point we need to go and have a coffee or a tea and continue this conversation. Sarah, if there's anything else, then you can ask. Otherwise,
there's lots more, but it depends on your capacity to keep going, guys.
Well, I just want to say that, I do a Zoom on Wednesday, and now it's going to be 8:30 for all the people who fall asleep early. So it's 8:30.
No. Do what you do. Give them Mac.
And so at 8:30, if you go on my Facebook page, Mac Brandon Facebook, I'll have where you can sign on to Zoom. And it's an opportunity for all the people who are listening today that they can talk. They can say, as well as we can, the things that are on their mind. And I think that Reverend Marc Oehler of the Westside Presbyterian Church is a wonderful and relevant theologian and preacher. And I think that if you have an opportunity, it's well worth your while to come to go and visit him. If you are so led at some point, you come and visit me too, because I think that we're going to be certainly in fellowship. And I certainly thank you, Marc. You are all that I envisioned you to be, and I want you to be blessed in all that you are. There was a letter that I wrote to the clergy. I wasn't intending it to be anything. I just spoke my heart, and you responded immediately and saying that you want to be a better pastor. And you already are a good one. And that's all I want to see from anyone, is for us to be better. Right? Us to be better people, us to be better educators, better principals, better superintendents of schools, better CEOs, better whatever we are. That is what we owe ourselves, and that is what we owe the divine. And I appreciate that spirit which lives in you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mac. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to thank everybody, of course, I'll show up. Why not? Why don't I show up here? Yeah, this was really big. Thank you guys so much. I loved, hearing your hearts. Mac, there are a few comments in the chat room about what tangible things can we do. I think there was one, let's see if I can find it here. I don't know. I can't locate it now, but we'll follow up next week with some of these questions. But so the article that I read in the Washington Post says, all we do is read and have these discussion groups. And as a matter of fact, right in the article, it says they have discussions called "Let's Talk About Race." I was like, oh my gosh. And it was kind of like, well, geez.
And they're wonderful.
What to be doing? I want to help. I want to do,
Right. So the answer is that discussions like Let's Talk About Race and reading is great. And what it does is it informs you and it edifies you. And then you go out and live your informed life. So the part A is to edify yourself. But part B is now informed. I might see the world in a different way. The person who I passed and who was invisible, simply because all my life that person was invisible, now I have a history and a backdrop and an understanding, and I might address that person, or at least see that person, or at least be inquisitive as to who that person is and what is the life that they lived. And it's not just Black and African American, it could be anyone. I had a discussion with someone who was South Asian. There's a whole community there, right? There can be, any number of peoples. But the more informed we are, let's never poo-poo that. The more informed we are, the better. But then we take that edification, we take that knowledge, and we live our lives. And so you're to be commended, because Let's Talk About Race is a perfect start for us.
Thank you. Can you just go back to what you said in the beginning of this conversation? You said sometimes when you're around people, you just kind of cringe and you just wait for it. You wait for that remark or that slight. Help me understand what you meant by that.
What
Don't
do I
remember
mean
what
by
you
it?
said.
Well, I meant that's what I feel. That's what I see.
Yeah. And so can you give me examples of some things?
I think I gave an example last week that there is a perception, and how people, if you go into a place where let's say there's a party, and Jeannie, you're a pretty person, you're a pretty individual, and you walk into the party, there are going to be people who just on the face of you, they're going to say, oh, hi, love your hair. Yeah, they're going to be people who are haters and don't like you, and you're going to feel the chilliness of that, right, when you're in their midst, right? Now, they may say, oh, no, never. We love you, but when you're not loved, right? That's real. That's something. Ask any child or ask any dog that barks at you, doesn't like you because they know you don't like dogs.
It's
right?
that energy, you can feel it.
That energy, right? But there's also tangible things, when you, and I understand, don't get me wrong, but I always keep distance away from cars. Let's say I'm walking from my car into Whole Foods. Well, I consciously always stay away. This is before COVID-19. I always keep a safe distance because I don't want the insult of the car door being locked, which is always, right? So someone looks out the side and locks, and I understand, don't get me wrong, right? But I understand it. Or the example that I said, when someone comes around a corner and sees me and says, "Woo, you scared me." Right? And then, of course, they end in a laugh. But am I that scary that I scare people typically once every 2 weeks in the supermarket? Right? Oh, you scared me. You begin to understand that you are, on some level feared and not understood. I mean, those are very small things. Anyone who is listening has stories of being the other. Anyone who's African American has stories of being the other, that they live their life. And here's the thing. We are all whole individuals. If you were a classroom or elementary school, I would say, repeat after me, class. You are all whole individuals. If we believe that people are whole in their humanity, then if there is any slight to them, it is not the issue of that person who is slighted. It is the issue of the person who is slighting, right? So, we experience, when people talk about experience every day, I think sometimes people on the other side think it's hyperbole when they talk about, my whole life I lived in fear of the police. And say, how can you live in fear of the police? Well, come on and hang out with me. Right? Come on and hang out with me and I will show you. And it is not until we educate ourselves, however we do, by conversation, by reading, by looking at the documentaries, 13 or any of these documentaries, that we begin to ask ourselves and chip away at the shellac covering that says it can't be true. We chip away at it and say, could it be true? Is it possible that he is not speaking? It's not a hyperbolic statement. Is it possible? No. People don't say you scare me. Yes, they actually do, right? But until you begin to say, wait a minute, let me be uncomfortable and begin to understand that world, then we begin to embrace each other's humanity. Finally, I live with such joy. I live with a joy of humanity through all of that because I am a full and complete human. And so I don't live in a state of woe is me, I'm the victim. I see people in their ignorance committing oppressive acts, and those acts can be subtle, but that does not spoil my joy. Right? Because my joy is a divine and whole joy, right? So sometimes we have to get that confused. Now, when it gets really critical is when we see people who are always angry, right? And so there's this piece of righteous anger, and then there's that piece of fleshly anger, right? Righteous anger says wrong is wrong, and I rail against the wrong, right? But there's some people who have been injured and they are angry. And so we're going to have to give space to all parties in this question. There are people on every area, and I was trying to push Reverend Oehler. I'll push him, and he answered and responded with aplomb. I mean, he was wonderful because he was willing to let us into him, and at the same time, being a leader of faith. But we have to continue to push and pull to exercise the elasticity of our will and our ideations and the thoughts and suppositions and assumptions that we have about what life is in America, what life is in Ridgewood, what life is vis-a-vis the question of race. We have this cast, we have this mountain of decisions that we have made about what is, ipso facto, what is the fact of our lives. But the fact of the matter is that it's only one lens that we live through, and our whole journey in living this life is to uncover new truths. That's what the prayer life is about. That's what the journey is. Marc was talking about the theological journey, right? We talk about moving in the imago Dei, in the image of Christ, right? You want to continue to uncover that stuff, which are assumptions, and move toward that which embraces the wholeness of humanity and the wholeness of the divine, right? So we just have to keep making ourselves uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Let me just say, completely. I just have to say, I am so uncomfortable. This has been a wonderful experience for me, and I cannot thank you enough for saying, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. And same with you, Marc and Sarah. Thank you so much for being on board with this. But I'll tell you, I am so stressed because this is so important, but I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to say anything wrong. I don't want to do it. I want to bring us all together. I want some sort of roadmap. I want to know,
Keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Doing exactly what you're doing. No, you're on the right road, right? Because when we want to move toward the new, there is that moment, and it's a nebulous, it's ambiguous. What does that mean? What should I do? But the fact that your spirit is willing to move toward that of understanding is so hopeful, because you said you read an article, and that's good. And now you kind of let that article percolate in you, and you will begin to act on it. You have a new understanding, right? And so you're going to the right place, and hopefully we all go to that same place together. Yes.
Well, thank you so much once again. We can kind of wrap this up tonight. Do you want to tell everyone who's going to be joining us next week? We have.
Yeah, you tell them.
Well, we have Arturo Lewis coming.
But Reverend
Huh?
Arturo Lewis is,
Oh, did you forget?
well, I didn't know what the status was, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, Arturo just had hip replacement surgery, so
Right.
God willing, he
Yeah.
will be joining us next
Right.
week.
And so he's an African American minister, and so he's going to, his
And professor.
yeah, and right, and so he's
Right.
going to. I'm sure that he will, in a professorial way, speak about some of the issues that we're talking about.
Yes.
And
He
so we
told me that
appreciate
he
him.
wants to talk about systemic racism, institutional racism,
Right.
and how we can sort of dismantle some of that. So he'll be giving us some tangible ideas about ways that we can help.
Right. And then in 2 weeks, we have the Reverend Sarah Lindsay. I can't wait for that.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, Lindsay rocks. So we're looking forward to that, and it's a good thing. So I'm very, very pleased. Thank you so much, Reverend Oehler. You are a gem in Ridgewood, and may you continue your work. Continue to be blessed in all that you do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Mac, and thank you everyone for tuning in again tomorrow, next Monday, same time, same place, for an even deeper discussion. And if for some reason you missed the entirety of this broadcast, it will be posted up on Ridgewood Talks on iTunes, and you can also find it on the Ridgewood Walks website. So we're going to be posting all of the things that Mark mentioned and some other little goodies too. So, just keep watching the Facebook page for all of that. So once again, everybody, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.